After reading Three Men in a Boat by Jerome K. Jerome, I had to go back to a rereading of Three Men on the Bummel by the very same author. This was authored a decade later. In Three Men in a Boat, we have seen how Jerome J, with his two friends, Harris and George, go on a very comic, funny, hilarious trip on the River Thames with their dog Montmorency. In this work, we see that this comes 11 years later, exactly is when the author wrote this work. And here we see the very same three men again embarking on an adventure. And this time we see that all three of them are rather tired of the monotony of domestic felicity and happiness. And so they decide to go on a cycle trip. That was a rage in Victorian England at that period. He is a late 19th century writer, and it was a period when everybody was taking excursions on bicycles. And the three friends, that is, of course, they had several options of going to the seaside, of going to on a trek, but finally they decide on the Bummel, and that is to cycle through the black forests of Germany. And in certain parts, I would say it is even more funnier than its predecessor. There has been at that period, certain critics have felt that nothing could match up to Three Men in a Boat, but I feel the general public cannot agree to it. I do not know if any Germans felt rather awkward reading certain passages, but I'm sure that the vast majority of Germans, just like the readers all over the world, would have had a good laugh at it. And we know the German government approved of the work because it has been a textbook in Germany for a very long time. So here we see that our urban, very polite, very cultivated author says only the truth, nothing but the truth. And here we have some of these passages. Here we see where how Jerome K. Jerome criticizes, or he is in a very gentle way, irony. We see that how he shows us how French is being taught in England. And this is something I believe that many people can identify as the second languages that are taught in schools. Here he says, a native French man is employed, who by the by is generally a Belgian, is no doubt a most worthy person and can, it is true, understand and speak his own language with tolerable ease. There his qualification cease. Invariably, he is a man with a remarkable inability to teach anybody anything. The very fact that he speaks French is enough for the British schools to employ him. This is what Jerome tells us. He is always a comic figure. No Frenchman of a dignified appearance would be engaged by any English school. If he possesses by nature a few harmless peculiarities, he is even more prized by his employers. The class naturally regards him as an animated joke. The 2 to 4 hours a week that are deliberately wasted on this ancient farce are looked forward to by the boys as a merry interlude in an otherwise monotonous existence. And then, when the proud parent takes his son and heir to France, merely to discover that the lad does not know enough to call a cab, he abuses not the system, but its innocent victim, the student. So, this is very true of education systems all over the world. About Germany, he says that the Germans are such a law abiding people that they simply, for a German child, he says the policeman is rather like Santa Claus, somebody whom he adores, because the German child is raised wanting to conform to every law. And they just have an sense of irony when you think of the wars that later followed. This was written, of course, before the wars. In the German parks, there are special seats labeled only for grown ups, and the German small boy, anxious to sit down and reading that notice, passes by and hunts for a seat on which children are permitted to rest. And there he seats himself, careful not to touch the woodwork with his muddy boots. Imagine a seat in Regent's or St. James Park labeled only for grown ups. Every child for 5 miles round would be trying to get on that seat and hauling other children off who were there. As for any grown up, he would never be able to get within half a mile of that seat for the crowd. The German small boy who has accidentally sat down on such without notice rises with a start when his error is pointed out and goes away with a downcast head, brushing to the roots of his hair with shame and regret. So, in the end, we also see him saying that the Bummel is a journey that takes you around and it makes you meet people whom you may never meet again. And briefly, you are learning lessons, you are having fun, you are being entertained. And at the last, you come back to the point where you started, enriched. And so I would say definitely a trip on the Bummel with Jerome K. Jerome will bring you back to the same point, far enriched and with laughter in your soul.